Return to our top story of the day. Private prisons company G4S in the hot seat in Parliament, answering questions about the daring prison escape by Facebook rapist and murderer Thabo Bester. G4S built and has been running the prison under contract to the Correctional Services Department for over 20 years now. I'm joined by the DA's Shadow Minister of Justice and former State Prosecutor Glynnis Breytenbach, who was in that Justice and Correctional Services Portfolio Committee meeting. Good evening, Glynnis. You had quite a field day. I could see your prosecutor roots coming out. You really tore into quite a lot of what we heard today. Did you learn anything new from G4S, something that for you is material in terms of what actually went down that night in May in Mangaung?
Good evening, Sally. Yeah, certainly we learned, I think, quite a lot that was new. They brought what in my view, a rather flimsy report that contained only exculpatory information, but it's what they didn't say that allowed us to interrogate them properly. There's so many things that don't add up. They for instance, knew that the surveillance, the recording portion of the surveillance system was malfunctioning for a period of 45 hours, just over that period of the actual escape. But not only did they know that had been tampered with and that it had been unplugged, the plug pulled from the wall, but they had the identity of the person who did it. And nothing was done about that until March this year. That's absolutely bizarre. G4S continued to insist until a couple of days ago that the body in the cell was that of Thabo Bester, when it became clear to absolutely everybody else in the world that it wasn't. They clung to that version. So their entire attitude, their approach, and even their approach today just underscores for me the fact that they want to say, we have a contract, we fulfill the terms of the contract, we have no other obligations. It's completely and utterly unacceptable, completely unacceptable that a serial rapist and murderer could walk out of their prison, waltz out of their prison, leave a dead body behind, some poor soul who was murdered, to take his place, and they clung to this version that it was him, and they knew that the system had been tampered with. They knew the identity of the person who worked for them and still works, still is under contract to them until today he handed himself over to the police. It's completely and utterly bizarre. So they take the approach, we've fulfilled all our contractual obligations and we have no other obligations. It's unacceptable.
But the question, I suppose, is where does the buck stop? They kept saying, oh, well, it's not for us to investigate, it's for the police to investigate. Is there an indication that they handed over everything they were concerned about, everything that didn't add up to the police, and then perhaps the police or Department of Correctional Services dropped the ball? I'm trying to work out who's blaming who and who didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Well, the issue is this. G4S is the origin of the problem. So Thabo Bester was in their care. They were supposed to keep him incarcerated. That was what they were contracted to do, and they failed to do it. So the problem starts with them. They can't escape that. It doesn't matter how hard they try to distance themselves from what's going on here and saying, no, sir, who, sir, me, sir, no, sir. So DCS is busy with an investigation, and they have submitted a substantial report. The Judicial Inspectorate was on the ball. They were there. They investigated and they submitted a very substantial report. We'll hear tomorrow what the police have done and what they haven't done. But the fact of the matter is that these are all role players. The Correctional Services, the police, and G4S are all role players in this debacle, and they must be held collectively responsible for what happened here.
It was interesting towards the last part this afternoon, the Integriton integrated systems people, where you basically just said, what are you doing here? You can't even answer questions properly. They couldn't really explain, even though there's this failed polygraph test where one of their own employees very clearly couldn't pass the test, asking him, did you help Thabo Bester escape from prison? It just seems so flimsy and so inept. And I'm trying to work out if it's a lack of willingness to testify, that everyone's absolutely terrified that they're going to be sued to hell and high water, or if there was this massive cover-up that no one really wants to to dive into? What is your sense? I mean, you must have come across this kind of incalcitrance before.
Look, I think that the problem is one of many parts. First of all, nobody wants to accept the final responsibility of the fact that Bester escaped. Well, he escaped out of a G4S prison that has been run by them and that they were paid very, very handsomely to run. And they were under contract to do it. So there's the problem. They dropped the ball and they are responsible and there's no question about it. The investigation is another matter. Why it's taken so long, why the police haven't moved, why DCS haven't moved. They did have documentation in their possession. Everyone was too happy to go along with the story that it was Thabo Bester in that cell, even though it must have been very clear from the post-mortem that it was at least questionable. And the fact that the person, whoever that poor soul was, died from blunt force trauma to his head, and there was no smoke inhalation, meant that he was dead before the fire started. So, that should have alerted almost anybody with any kind of, interrogative skills. So the fact is that the authorities knew about this at the very least in October last year and said nothing, never told the public, never told the victims of Bester, left them to wander around defenseless, not caring that they may run into them at the nearest checkers. Those are women who had to give the most horrific evidence in rape cases. They're rape survivors. There is nothing worse.
Yeah.
And nothing was done to warn them, to protect them, to make sure that they received the kind of support that they needed, which I find absolutely unacceptable. All of those departments will have to come and explain how they dropped the ball. But collectively, they're responsible for this mess.
You asked some very probing questions about the ownership of the Integriton Solutions company, which of course is responsible for maintaining the CCTV cameras and the recording equipment. You spoke about SA Fence and Gate, Spec Africa, and you mentioned Jeff Greyling as the largest shareholder, pointing to what Angelo Agrizzi said at the State Capture Commission. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what exactly are you suggesting? What are you concerned about?
Well, I'm concerned that there's an umbrella company that owns all of these companies, Fence and Gate, Integritron, that the major shareholder is Greyling, that they have a cozy relationship with the ANC, that there's a connection there with Pasasa, and that they're sort of funders of the let me just look it up here for a minute, the Progressive Business Forum of the ANC. So in Zuma's time, that was a big fundraiser for the ANC. So all of those dodgy connections that need to be probed further. I don't have the company documents. I'm hoping to get them tomorrow. But I certainly have enough documentation in my possession to know that there's an interconnectivity here that doesn't look pure as driven snow.
And of course, mentioning state capture, and of course, I have to ask you about what happened on Friday, the news that extradition of the two Gupta brothers back to South Africa from Dubai had been denied by a court in Dubai. Do you think that the South African government, the authorities here in South Africa, who they say they ticked every box, do you think that they possibly got it wrong? Do you think they should have done more?
Well, clearly they should have done more because the extradition was denied, and for no good reason. It's fine for the UAE to say we're not extraditing on corruption because we have concurrent jurisdiction, and we could prosecute for that. It only means something if they actually prosecute for it. If they have no intention of doing so, they must give him to us so that we can prosecute them. So that's a meaningless, thing. If the UAE is not going to prosecute the Guptas, then they must give them to us to do it. And to say that we didn't meet the technical requirements, well, that's another story. We need to interrogate that extradition application that was submitted. We need to see whether it was in fact correct, if they did dot every I, if they did cross every T, and if they didn't, how we can do it better next time, because this is spilt milk. There's nothing to be done about it. So we must learn from our mistakes and do better next time. Glynnis, the Guptas are not in the UAE anymore, obviously. They're gallivanting on South African passports. So they need to be, a red notice needs to be issued. They need to be arrested wherever they are. And an extradition application brought in that country, but a better one than this one.
I have to ask you one final question. We've only got a minute before we have to close the show, Glynnis, but we've heard today that there are now in total 4 arrests in connection with this prison break. We're hearing it's Dr. Nandipa's bodyguard who's been arrested, and also obviously the guy who failed the polygraph for this IT company. Are you confident, and I suppose it's a case of perhaps better late than never, that eventually we will get to the bottom of this, that arrests are going to start coming thick and fast, and we might get the full shape of exactly what happened?
Oh, absolutely. I've got absolutely no doubt we'll get to the bottom of it. It's a production of Hollywood proportions, and many palms were greased very clearly to pull this off. Many people had to cooperate, and as we go through the system one by one, it will itself demonstrate which people had to, of necessity, be involved to make happen what happened. And so, yes, we will find them. Of course, also these ones that have been arrested, and particularly the one that handed himself over, people tend to, as the prison doors open for them, they tend to want to take people with them, not go to prison alone. So they'll start, also imparting information that will be helpful in the investigation.
Yes, that's good news indeed. And of course, we expect Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipa back in South Africa apparently by Friday. That's what authorities are hoping. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening, dear Shadow Minister of Justice, former State Prosecutor Glynnis Breytenbach there. And that's all from